What is the freakiest/creepiest thing that's ever happened to you? Serious? For 2 years, I had a roommate who was on meds for psychosis. It was me, him, and another guy. He was fine but a little weird. Me and the other dude always made sure to include him in stuff because we didn't want him to feel isolated and possibly worsen his mental state. He never blew up or anything like that, just a quiet and awkward guy. He was not a drinker. The three of us would go to the pub, but he never had more than one beer. He'd spend the night stoically listening to our nonsense, sometimes chiming in. But this night was a little different. That day he seemed really chipper, much happier than ever before. Not manic or anything, just positive and energetic. When I came home from work, he was chatting with the other roommate and was cracking jokes. We go out to the pub and I get uneasy because he downs his first beer and asks for another, the very first time he has more than one. After he finished his second beer, I took the other roommate aside and we decided to just keep an eye on it. He was having a blast, we didn't want to ruin his fun. He was having more fun than we've ever seen and it looked like his whole mindset was turning in a positive direction. Eventually we were all 8 pints in. This was irresponsible of us, we had never seen him drunk before and had no way of knowing how he handled alcohol. Surprisingly, he was fine. He hit on a few girls and got some interest in return, we had never even seen him talk to a girl before. When he came back we just had to ask him, "Why are you so happy today?" He said he got some good news, that his father passed away. We put it together that he didn't have the best relationship with his dad. He went into all the abuse he's experienced growing up, how he'd watch his dad beat his mom and little sister, powerless to stop him, or how he'd get tied up in the freezing garage for entire nights as punishment for tiny infractions, just awful stuff. We did a cheers to this because it looked like he was starting to find meaning in life after his abuser was gone. One morning, 2 days later, he was arrested. That day he was so happy, he drove 2 hours back to his hometown and bashed his dad's head in. The worst part is everyone come out to say, on Facebook, that the abuse never happened, including his mom and sister, because he was apparently saying these things to the police. The story made some waves in our state as well, with the court concluding that the abuse probably didn't happen. Edit, confusing wording, possibly. We went to the pub the evening after he did the deed. He drove out that morning and came back before I got back from work. In 1991 I went to a 7-Eleven by myself when we were at my grandmother's house. There was another kid there about my age, we looked similar, etc. I bought a Slurpee and walked back to my grandma's house and that was that. The other kid was kidnapped and murdered, pretty much right after leaving that 7-Eleven. The only thing I can think of that kept it from being me was maybe I won some sort of cosmic coin toss. The police are pretty sure they know who did it but couldn't prove it, and to this day it still weirds me out. I'm 41 now and live in that neighborhood. I've told this story before but it is still by far the creepiest thing to happen to me. When I was 16 I had just gotten my license as well as my first after-school job. Since school ended about an hour before I had to be at work, I would sometimes park in the adjacent parking lot and take a nap. This was a shopping strip with a grocery store, restaurants, and a bank on a fairly busy Friday afternoon. As I'm sitting there drifting off I see a black Denali pull up behind me blocking my car in the spot. A gentleman jumps out in a business suit and asks if I can help him. He looks nice enough, and I'm assuming he is looking for directions. He starts to explain to me that his wife and he were supposed to be signing for a loan at the bank behind us today, so that they can purchase a boat, but she is stuck in a meeting and can't make it. He then asks if I wouldn't mind posing as her and singing the documents for her. I'm completely blown away, but super shy and feel the need to let him down easy, stupid I know. So I tell him I don't think they'll believe I am your wife. He then tells me it's fine, he has her license with him, which he shows me, and she has the same hair/eye color as me, so they won't know. At this point I'm freaking out. I start to notice how disheveled he looks, he's sweating, and surprise, no wedding ring. I just want him away from my car so I start telling him I can't help him, that he needs to go ask someone else. He says it's fine, it'll be quick, just jump in my truck and I'll take you over there. Like I said this bank was in the same shopping strip, there would be no need to drive to it. Even in my gullible teenage mind I know the story is complete bull. I'm telling him no over and over, while scanning the parking lot for anyone who might be noticing, but of course no one has. He then starts getting irate telling me that I'm perfect and the only one who can do it, how beautiful I am, can he at least take me to dinner, and so on. I start trying to close my window and he reaches through, grabs my shoulder and starts trying the door handle, which was luckily locked. I'm so frozen I don't even really react, I can't go anywhere as he's blocking me in. Suddenly, and I'm not really sure why, I just blurt out that I'm only 16, and for some reason that freaks him out. He slowly backs away, gets in his truck, and leaves. I called the police afterwards but they never followed up with me. But I just know he had found that license and made up that story as a way to lure women into his truck, and it scared the hell out of me that he could have convinced someone before. Years later I spotted him on the sex offender registry for assault, uneasy face. One night I had a dream that a coworker killed me with an axe, and when I got to work the next day she was telling a fellow coworker that she had a dream that she killed me with a knife. Sort of an odd coincidence, she never did try to kill me, but it was a little bit creepy. Had a good friend die in a car wreck, and a few weeks later, myself and another friend both had the same dream about him on the same night, where we were all seated at a dinner table and he was telling us he was alright. That was kinda weird. I was about 10 and I had a huge fear of someone being in my house, to the point where I wouldn't go to the basement because it scared me. But I am glad I had that fear, because one day during the summer I was trying to go to sleep and I heard a noise from above me, and I freaked out. I then noticed over the coming days that my room was really hot, and I thought this was strange because we just got new air vents put in. My dad was checking them out and went to get some sort of tool, when I saw the scariest image possible. There was a skinny man looking at me and my dad from the vent in my ceiling. I froze and pretended not to notice him, and I went to get my dad, and me in my 10-year-old mind was instantly thinking run with him out of the house, but I have 2 cats and were scared to leave them, so I grabbed a paper towel and a pen and wrote in my chicken scratch handwriting, "There is a man in my vent," but he couldn't read it, and asked what it meant, and that's when we heard a thud, and he looked at it again and must have put it together, because he grabbed me and called the police. When my mom got home she got to see the man being dragged out of the house in cuffs. Even though he was caught and I still had a somewhat happy ending, the image of looking up and seeing his face, and being so petrified I couldn't move or scream still haunts me. When I was about 5 I was visiting my grandma in the city with my mom, dad and sister. We were walking towards the city center, so it was pretty crowded. I remember letting go of my dad's hand and then feeling him grab back hold of it a few moments later. I kept walking, I don't know how far. I hear my dad shouting from behind me and grabbing my other arm. I hear him say sorry and I look up and I realize I was holding hands with an old man that I didn't know. My dad assumed that I'd accidentally grabbed onto this man's hand thinking he was my dad. I remember him pulling me away all embarrassed and I was just thinking, but the man grabbed my hand. So basically, I think some guy tried to snatch me out of a crowded area. I still don't understand why my dad thought I grabbed onto his hand. My parents were normally quite paranoid about strangers. He must have been distracted when talking to my grandma. I could hear a woman's voice singing almost inaudibly on my daughter's baby monitor. It happened a few nights in a row. I began thinking back over all the doors that opened on their own, and weird noises in the house. After a week I had almost convinced myself the house was haunted. Then one night I heard the woman's voice singing clearly for the first time. It was Taylor Swift singing Bad Blood. Turns out I just live in an old house and my cheap Chinese baby monitor can used hardly pick up the local pop station if it's a clear night. My cousin and I were probably targeted for a scam, but I still don't know how or why. We are 6 years apart, but went to the same high school at different times. Small school, graduating classes about 60. Years later, we are on a road trip together several states away, and decide to stop at a huddle house for coffee. We walk in, and the guy at the next table turns around and smiles and says, "You went to Endertown High School, right?" When we say yes, he says he and his girlfriend, also at the table, smiling and not talking, went there too. We didn't recognize them, but smiled politely, commented it was a small world. He starts to rapidly talk about different things from the school, just disjointed comments that were a bit odd. He talked like a salesman, almost. At first, we smile and nod, but he had weird facts wrong. So we ask what year he graduated. He claimed not to remember. So we asked follow-up questions and he gets cagey. Suddenly the girlfriend, "Oh yes, this isn't working," and they suddenly pay and leave, food untouched. We since have determined they didn't go to our school, and have tried to figure out how he knew what he did, to no avail. Edit, because I got some questions, neither my cousin nor I lived in my hometown by this point, the car wasn't bought in our hometown and didn't have any stickers etc. From there. The guy had just enough facts correct, 1 or 2 teachers' names, and a diner across the street, totally off the cuff that we really questioned it afterwards. Dude. This exact same thing happened with my wife and I recently when we were at a newer restaurant in town. Although in this case the guy talking was a busboy there. He saw her baseball shirt, Chicago, and then asked what high school she went to. It was in a small suburb and we now live far away out of state. He claimed to be a recent graduate from the school, compared to my wife graduating 10 years ago, but had weird disjointed responses to references. He asked her who her favorite teacher was and when she responded he claimed he had no idea who that was, and all the ones she asked about he'd either say he didn't take classes with or offer a vague "oh yeah I knew them" type responses. He provided no details on his end that would verify to me that he actually knew the small Chicago suburb or the school, and there was no common understanding. At first I thought he was being flirty, but then I wondered if it was some kind of scam and what he was trying to pull, especially since I was there and he was somebody that worked at the restaurant. Is this a common con trick? What's the end goal? I was alone in my house with my stepdad. I went to the bathroom. When I sat down on the toilet, that's when I saw someone was trying to open the door. I pushed it and said occupied, but whatever was at the other side kept trying to open the door. I called my stepdad and I heard him from the kitchen saying yeah. At that point I was terrified. It suddenly stopped. I checked the whole house for anyone other than my stepdad, didn't find anybody. I went to the other bathroom and then used it. Still don't know what the hell was at the other side of the door. I was probably 9 years old, in about 1995. At that time all the schools and parents were warning us of stranger danger. It seemed like a lot of kids were getting kidnapped because they were being tricked into helping the kidnappers find a lost pet. One day I was riding my bike alone on our street, a fairly populated street, lots of kids out playing and whatnot, and a green two-door car pulled up with a woman driving and a guy in the passenger seat. The guy calls out the window to me, "Hey kid. We lost our dog, can you help us find her?" I can still remember the feeling I felt. It was like sirens were going off, and I thought for a split second that this was it, I was going to be kidnapped. A rush of what felt like burning hot adrenaline through my body. I felt like I could hear everything 10x louder and see everything 10x better. I've never felt anything like that before. I hopped off my bike, pulled the front tire up so I could turn around faster, and I booked it home. I was shaking and tears were pouring down my face even though I wasn't crying. I got home and told my mom what happened. She called the police, but I'm not sure if the people were ever caught. Crazy. I came downstairs to tell my grandmother that Daddy is sleeping with his eyes open. He is type 1 and had been drinking. He took insulin to counter the rise in blood sugar but wasn't paying attention and took too much. When the ambulance finally got there, we lived on the outskirts of a small town that didn't have a hospital. He was about 5 minutes away from death. If we had waited any longer, he would have died. Please take care of your diabetic pals. If something doesn't seem right, it probably isn't. Know what to do in the event of a high or low sugar problem? Had a dream that I was going to get into a car accident. Woke up and the feeling that I was going to get into an accident just kinda stayed with me. Later that morning, some idiot ran a red and T-boned the car I was in. I've had a couple occasions where I have the overwhelming sense that if I get in my car, I will die. I usually bum around the house, or sit down at a cafe and have a muffin until the feeling passes. Each time when I do eventually leave, I end up stuck in traffic because there was a terrible car accident on my route. I can never help but feel that if I hadn't delayed my drive, I would have been involved. Confirmation bias, I know, but the feeling is so intense that it's hard to shrug it off completely. One evening, for some reason, I thought about a person that I had gone to college with but had not seen in more than 30 years. So I decided to Google her name to see what she had done with her life. I found her obituary. It had been posted earlier that day. If I had Googled her one day earlier, I would never have known that she had died. Wow, same here. A girl I was acquaintances with in high school, she had the same first name as me and it's generally uncommon. Somewhere in my mid-20s she pops in my mind for some reason. We were never actually friends either, just casual talk in class. Googled her name and found out just a day or so prior she was murdered by her boyfriend. Really sad. Yikes. I was in high school and a student from my grade was reported missing when I was in 11th grade. The police didn't report any new developments until 12th grade, when the teacher made an announcement to our class that his body was found. Once again, the police never released the circumstances of his death. What was creepy was that the night prior, I had Googled his name to see if any new developments were found. And just one day later, I found out he had died. Sad face. I had a roommate who was always a complete asshole. Never was polite or kind to anyone. One night after I helped his drunk ass to bed, he turned to me and said, "I really appreciate you and I know you don't like seeing me like this. You've been a good roommate and friend, thank you." I found him dead the next morning due to an undiagnosed heart condition that alcohol had amplified. Not creepy or freaky in the normal sense, but I will never forget how serious and genuine he was in his last words spoken ever. It was the first time I had ever heard him compliment anyone. One Christmas my grandparents rented 2 beach houses in Florida right next to each other and had the whole family spend a week there. One of my sisters, who we knew to sit up and talk in her sleep but had never sleepwalked to our knowledge, went to sleep in one of the beach houses and woke up in the other our first night there. After that we started locking the doors at night because the Gulf was right there, maybe 50 feet from the door she would have walked out of while asleep. Sure enough, on 2 other nights she ended up waking up right at the door after apparently failing to figure out how to unlock it in her sleep. It made me wonder if there's some Gulf of Mexico equivalent to Cthulhu. I was very close to my grandfather. He was easily the best person in my life. He was an amazing man and went way out of his way to be supportive and connected. He wrote me letters all the time, we stayed at their house often, he encouraged my education and would send workbooks, novels, etc. for me. He had worked in education until he retired, a school district superintendent, and really believed in the importance of early childhood education and reading. He was very involved in my education and a very positive man. He died when I was 14 and I was devastated. It really changed a lot in my family dynamics. He had always been the head of the family. My dad, his son, was an alcoholic. I struggled with depression. It was a really hard time for me and I missed him greatly. I still do. When I was 25, my first child was born. We named her Raven, not a super common name here, Canadian. When she was about 4 or 5, I was browsing through the discard books at our local library and came across a book about a raven who thought she had ugly feathers and wanted beautiful feathers like all the other birds. The moral of the book being that we all have our own traits and abilities that makes us special, and that through accepting ourselves and our own individuality we will have a much better life than if we try to be something we aren't. I thought it was a touching book and really seemed perfect for my daughter, Raven, so I bought it and took it home. When I went to read it to her later that day, I opened to the front cover and saw a sort of sticker/plaque on the inside cover. It said that this book had been donated to the city's library system, among several others, in my grandfather's name when he died. I dropped the book in shock and a chill ran up my spine, but there it was. His name, his date of death, a blurb about how important children's education had always been to him and how he believed our children are the future. He had left a sum of money in his will to our city's public library system to use to purchase books for the children's sections. I called my mom and told her about this. She was stunned. She knew that this had been a part of his will, but that was it. So, I happened to pick up a book at my local library, out of quite a few libraries. It's a big city, about a raven, my daughter's name, who learned to love herself for who she was, which had always been my grandfather's message to me, that had been donated by my grandfather's estate to the library system, 15 years previously. On the day that it was put out for sale as a used discard book, bought it and had not found the plaque inside until I went to read it at home. It felt like a gift from him to me and my child. I can't even fathom the odds of that happening. I have never been a believer of the supernatural, and I don't believe my grandfather's ghost somehow arranged this, but it does seem to be a stretch to call it a coincidence. I like to believe that his spirit somehow still checks in on me, and my kids. I don't know how else to explain this. It still sends a chill up my spine. At the time I felt such a sense of love and comfort. I have missed my grandfather for many years now. My daughter is 14, the age I was when he died. She's long grown out of reading that story, but I keep it close just the same. I used to live in a one-bedroom apartment with a den. In the den we had a spare bed for visitors or whatever. One night my boyfriend was super sick, so I went and slept in the spare bed. In the middle of the night I had what seemed to be sleep paralysis, where I couldn't move but was seemingly awake. In that state I saw a dark figure walk into the room and just stand over me for a while. Like the dark figure was right over my face. The next day I was very freaked out. I told my boyfriend and he asked if I was joking. The same night he saw a dark shadowy figure in our bedroom, pacing in front of the bed. He said he slept with the light on all night. Which had explained why it was on the next morning when I went into the room. This happened about a year ago and we haven't talked about it since. We'd rather forget that entire night happened. I live in a 4-bedroom home with just my mother and daughter. My mom doesn't work and stays up way later than I do since I have to get up early. When my daughter was around 2ish she noticed it was more fun to stay up late with my mom instead of sleeping with me. One night I woke up to a very faint noise at the foot of my bed and a shadow against the wall, and I felt a hand grab my foot. I can't even explain how scared I was. In half a second I thought, should I pull away or kick it away to save myself? It was my daughter coming to sleep with me. My heart has also not been the same since. I have a very vivid memory of waking up terrified in the middle of the night and running to my parents' room because I saw a ghost when I was a kid. He followed me and stared at me from the doorway as I crawled into their bed and hid under the covers. We looked at each other for a few minutes and then he left. I was so shaken that I stayed awake the rest of the night until my parents woke up in the morning. I was an adult when I realized that it was not a ghost and actually someone scoping out our house in the middle of the night. I was home alone, laying down on my living room floor, and hardcore spacing out at the ceiling. I heard my mother scream on my front porch. I rushed out, but she wasn't there. I ran around the outside of my house. Not a single person in sight. It 10,000% sounded like my mom, and it curdled my bones because it was so raw and animalistic in its sound. I called her right away. Mom picks up the phone and I ask her if she is alright. She responds that she is and tells me to hold on for a minute while she pulls over into the parking lot of a business. She was driving and didn't want to talk on the phone at the same time. Seconds later, I hear a lot of noise and my mom screamed. An eternity stretches on before mom is calm enough to say anything coherent. She goes on to tell me how the car in front of her and the one behind her, before she pulled over, the ones that continued on the same path of travel that she had been on, had been struck by a speeding semi that ran a red light at the next intersection. It was a terrible accident with extensive injuries. The semi clipped the rear of the front vehicle and front of the rear vehicle. My mom's car would have been hit dead center. We always joke that we are psychic, as this is not the first instance like it that we have had, but it was definitely the most freaky of the bunch. TLDR, I'm psychic and saved my mom's life. 3 times in my life I have awoken to see the same golden grid projected on my wall. Twice in my youth, and once more a few years ago. It resembles a projection of light that has passed through a yellow, patterned glass. But that's not likely, because my first bedroom didn't have windows, the light didn't move, and when I placed my hand in it, the light did not project onto it. It fades after about 1 minute and I go back to sleep. Edit, made a quick sketch of it.